the podcast where we debate which track to scratch off some of the most known and unknown albums of all time.
We live in an era of singles.
This is an album.
People no longer listen to an album for the work it truly is.
It kind of defines a band.
It's just not something that people relate to nowadays.
We've all gotten the dreaded.
It started out as a game.
Which track on the album would you scratch out if you had to? Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Scratch a Track presented by the Dude and Grim Show. I am the Dude and with me as always is Grim. How we doing there, Grim?
I am doing pretty well this fine evening, Duderino.
Awesome. All right. That's what we like to hear. Well, before we get started and before we get into scratching away, I just want to let everyone know that we can now be found on all major podcasting platforms as well as all major social media platforms. So from a podcasting perspective, that includes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And then there's a whole host of other, I think, smaller brands and podcasts. So if you are affiliated with those, then I'm sure you can find us by searching Scratch a Track. We can also be found on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and we have our very own YouTube channel. So we are hitting all the major platforms, and you can find some really good information there, and we'll be putting a variety of content. So can't wait to interact with all you guys, right, Graham?
Yeah, we're hoping to get a lot of listener feedback, a lot of opinions on what you would scratch, maybe opinions on different albums that you'd like to bring to the table, as we would always like to have some different content to listen to and something else to get out the screwdriver for and start scratching away.
Yeah. It would be really interesting to see some of the albums that other people are into and want us to take a look at. So,
yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. I got my screwdriver ready. I don't know about you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why don't you tell all of our fine fans what album we will be scratching away today?
Well, today we are going to be talking about the classic Graceland by Paul Simon. I would argue one of the most highly regarded albums of all time, definitely the 80s, and certainly as a child of the 80s, a big memory in my childhood, and I don't know a whole lot of people who don't have this album in some sort of memory of their childhood. I mean, for me, it was basically part of the soundtrack to growing up.
Yeah, dude, those people, man. I mean, actually, I'm one of those people. I was unfortunately, I was exposed to a lot of stuff at a very young age, as far as movies and music go. I don't think this was one of them. I just don't. I don't know what I was doing in 1986 or what my dad was doing, but I'm sure he has this album. I'm going to go through his collection. I mean, it seems like, I think it said that 16 million people have bought it. So I would hope my dad was one of them. Right?
Yeah, you would think.
Yeah. So is that kind of, it was for you, it was when you were a kid and something like your dad hadn't played and you just kind of knew it? That's
family car trips. I mean, yeah, it was just kind of a regular fixture, musically speaking, in the family.
Yeah.
And, of course, at the time, I thought it was a really cool album that we all liked, and I didn't realize the depth that it had and the longevity that it would have, and especially I didn't realize a lot of the controversy that surrounded it.
Certainly had that.
I mean, we spoke before about the really good documentary that's out there on this, which I watched for a second time recently, and it was interesting because I think from a career standpoint, he kind of had a flop of an album before that and was going through some personal turmoil, and because of that, was able to just kind of sneak away to South Africa and record this album without a whole lot of pressure from the record company. I don't think a lot of people knew what he was doing. I don't think a lot of people really cared.
Yeah, and that's what I've heard as well. We all know Paul Simon from Simon and Garfunkel and The Graduate and Mrs. Robinson, and definitely had a lot of hits. And then I think I think most people's perception and knowing who Paul Simon is. And
a legitimate solo career in the 70s. I mean,
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, definitely had those songs, and some albums there. But I think a lot of people, for me, I always knew him. The first thing when I think of Paul Simon, and it's probably because I come from movies and more of a film background, but I think of The Graduate. Like that's just what I think of.
Oh, that's fair.
And plus I wasn't exposed to, Graceland when I was 4 years old. So,
gross.
I know. Hey, dude, I will give you Rich's number, man, and you can give him a call, man.
I probably still remember it.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll talk to you about it, man. I'm sure he will. So, but yeah, going back to this and kind of everything around it, he had a couple of flops, I think, leading up to it, and his marriage to the late great Rebel Princess Carrie Fisher kind of disintegrated. He talked about, I think he was on tour and all this stuff was going on, and he was promoting I think another album, like a comeback thing with Art Garfunkel, and then during that time he decided to get married to Carrie. Just probably not the best time to do it, and I think everything just kind of came to a head, and at that period he was just done. You have a flop, your marriage falls apart. He was going through a lot of things, and in that
where do you
documentary.
start?
Yeah, right. And in that documentary, I think he talks about driving. I think he was driving around New York, and his friend had given him a cassette tape, and even driving back and forth, I think from the city, he said that it quickly became one of basically his go-to tape. And
and it was the South African music, which
exactly.
To come to find out was in a lot of ways even disregarded within their own culture, or at least not taken as seriously as some other music. Right. But it has this really amazing, interesting quality. And from a musicianship perspective, I mean, I don't know where these guys come up with the guitar lines and the bass lines, but they play so awesome and in such a unique way that I can see why it grabbed him, right?
Yeah. Well, the title of the name of the cassette tape, Gumboots, Accordion Jive Hits Volume 2.
That's
now
sweet.
That, dude. Now let me just tell you, dude. You remember when we were kids and they had like the Jock Jams tapes and everything?
Yeah.
Like, you could get like the CDs on the infomercials, and there was all these volume things, dude. Here's the thing. I want to track down Volume 1. I mean, if you're listening to Volume 2 and that inspires you to come up with Graceland, just imagine what you could do with Volume 1. I mean,
I have no
holy
idea.
hell. That would be it'd be pretty wild, man. It'd be pretty wild.
I know it. So he goes over there, right? He goes to South Africa. And partners with a lot of these musicians. And from what I understand, a lot of these things that became the basis for many of the songs were kind of like these just jams that they would get into.
Yep.
And it was just like, record the tracks and we'll bring them back and do things with them later. And I don't know if that's true for all of them, but a lot of them. And
a handful for sure.
And I know he got a lot of flack for this, because I think some people felt as if he used the musicians and was just kind of stealing their music. But I believe that in retrospect, I mean, he brought all these people on tour. He basically promoted their music to this large Western audience that probably would have never heard of it. So I feel like in a way they kind of did each other quite a big favor. And I think that's how both parties look at it in retrospect, and probably at the time.
Yeah. I mean, that's what my understanding is. He basically went, he listened to these tapes. They tracked down kind of the people. They made some connections over there, and he went over there really with no songs in mind. He just kind of showed up, and they were just kind of hang out and they jammed. And yeah, dude, there's no way. I mean, he used his stature and who he was to also help get this music out to people who never would have heard it.
Yeah.
There's no way they ever would have heard it. So to make the argument that he was using them, I can see how people would say that. At the same time, they were using each other, and I think everyone I would have benefited from it.
Yeah, and at that point, it's a symbiotic relationship. I mean, it's a really good collaboration, and I just you couldn't imagine what these songs would have sounded like, if at all, if he just used regular, honky studio musicians that, and not to say they're not amazing in their own right, but I mean, I'm sorry, they just don't have those same kind of chops. I've just never heard anybody play like those guys.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing that adds on to the controversy is the state of the country that South Africa was in at the time. It was very, very tumultuous there. From 1948 to the early 90s, they had severe racial segregation.
Apartheid,
it was pretty much, yeah. I mean, it was pretty much, it was white supremacy that, they dominated politically and socially and economically. And I mean, there was laws and curfews in place. Even when he was over there recording with them, there were people putting in tracks and they were like, well, it's getting dark. Like we got to go because these Black African American or African musicians, they couldn't go out on the streets past dark, or they would get arrested. I mean, they couldn't use public transportation, so they would need a ride. I mean, this is
stuff we can't imagine.
Yeah. I mean, we have, that's for another podcast. We all have our whole host of issues we have here in our country, but that's pretty crazy, man. That's pretty crazy. So having to deal with that, and there was certain political pressures, and even after this album came out and it was successful, a lot of people criticized him for going over there, for kind of using them for breaking kind of these barriers and everything. Dude, he wasn't trying to make any political statement. He just liked the sound, man.
Well, and that's a good point. I mean, this was really musicians collaborating. This wasn't him, saying, well, I'm just gonna go ahead and single-handedly bring this to the rest of the world so everyone knows what a problem there is here. It was just really great collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, even speaking to, we'll get into the individual tracks, but there's, it's not necessarily like even, how Bob Marley was, who he was, he used his music as a sounding board and, to really get his thoughts and, as a political, kind of hammer. A lot of these songs, at least when I listened to them, I didn't feel a whole lot of, political anxiety. I mean, there's a few things here and there, but that didn't seem to, at least in the lyrics, that didn't seem to be what he was going for. It was, hey, these guys make music and I want to do it with them. Well,
sure. And I think a lot of it's personal. And I guess the one song that comes to mind to me is not even necessarily political, but maybe more of just a microcosm of where society was just The Boy in the Bubble. Because if you listen to the lyrics of that, I mean, he just talks about all these things that are going on, technology, and I mean, it just kind of encompasses like so many different themes of modern society in that song. Sure. But again, not overtly political.
Right. I was actually going to say that the song that actually resonated to me about the conditions and everything there is actually Homeless.
Yeah.
That I mean, to me that's a really big one, and pretty much front and center is the South African musicians singing in harmony, and Paul Simon doesn't even really come until the end, but we can get to that. We can get to that in a minute. But
now
sorry. Go ahead. No,
I was just going to say one quick thing that I didn't realize is that not only is most of this in conjunction with these South African musicians, but the last song on the album, he collaborates with Los Lobos, and that became controversial in itself because they more or less accused him of stealing their song. And I did not know about this until reading.
Either did I.
Yeah. And which,
no,
I mean, again, we'll get into our scratches, but I don't know if that's like, if you're really that mad about that song being stolen, I mean, I'd go back to the typewriter.
Yeah. Paul Simon did, and we'll talk about it when we get to that song, but I think he had his response, I think, was a good response to it. And yeah, we will definitely get into that. But so talking about this album just initially as a whole, we've talked about the kind of the recording process and everything. But as a whole album, he thought of it, I think, more as an album that alternated between kind of more playful and more serious songs. And he thought of it actually kind of like as a play. And he said, as in a play, the mood should keep changing. A serious song may lead to something abstract or followed by something humorous. And listening to it, it's really a lot of the words that he has and comes up with. Some of it is very deep and serious, and there's definitely songs, and you get the feeling about his marriage breakups and stuff like that. But then there's also other lyrics where he's gets a little sillier and he's talking about a turnaround jump shot and stuff like that, where you're just like, oh, okay. So it's I wouldn't say all over the place, because one of the things to me that I really enjoy about this album is it has a really consistent kind of feel to it. It feels really authentic to me. It doesn't overreach. It doesn't try to be more than it is. It really just kind of holds the same, to me, the same feel throughout. And
I would agree with that for sure.
A lot of the songs flow, and I know you kind of mentioned it earlier, but that bass, man, the bass,
I know.
Like they use that as kind of the rhythm. And he's playing
a fretless bass of all things. And when to see him play that thing, I mean, he's unbelievable.
He's all over, man. Yeah, he is. It was pretty cool. So yeah, and I think you're probably referring to some of the scenes of the documentary, which again I'll throw a plug, and we're not affiliated with that, but you can find it on Amazon Prime. The Graceland documentary is very cool.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Very informative, and you get a good exposure.
And the main guitar player too that he was working with. I mean, just these parts that he came up with. I don't know how to. I don't want to say attack, but address the instrument in the way of coming up with a part that he does. It's just, it's really unique, and it's fascinating to hear, what he came up with as his parts for these songs. It's totally really fantastic playing.
Totally. Well, I think it's about time we get into this one, my friend.
Yeah.
So we start with, this was an LP, so we're running at just around 40 plus minutes. And side one starts with the Boy in the Bubble. And I think the first thing for me that grabbed me is, dude, the accordion. I mean, it just such an, I don't, when I think of an African instrument, the last thing I think of is actually an accordion. But man, it just, boom, just stands out. And then I think like 3 like booming drum beats come in, and it's just like, dude, then you're off to the races. It's really cool, man.
And and in the core, for some reason, I always equate probably my Polish heritage, but I always equate the accordion with kind of goofier like polka music. But it almost has almost has like a little darker feel the way he plays it, and I really, really like that.
It does. And some of the drum like beats and hits, I believe they recorded all this stuff down in for a few weeks down in South Africa, and then they came back, and I think they said they did add on some layers to make some of these things sound deeper and thicker. So
you can. It's like that '80s drum sound with like the gated reverb and just everything sounding really huge. So that's one thing I was going to mention when you said the album's consistency is the drums do kind of have that 80s stereotypical drum sound, not to get too nerdy, but it just sounds really big and like it was recorded in a cathedral or something. I mean,
it's very full, definitely.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
But again, the lyrics on this song, I think, are really, like I was saying earlier, just kind of a microcosm of his view of society at the time. And
Sure.
like you said, talking about turnaround jump shots and every generation throwing a hero up the pop charts, and just kind of lays it all out in a very not necessarily cynical, but a very good way.
Sure. And that's one thing I think. I mean, I think some of these songs were recorded in. He went down there and he didn't have full songs. In process, and a lot of this, from what I hear, the producer, they actually and I'm not sure how this was done, especially in 1986. A lot of this was they said converted over to digital somehow when they started editing and mixing.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's
and I don't know if Pro Tools existed back then, but it must have been very primitive.
And really slow.
Yeah. Can you imagine that? So I would be very curious. I couldn't find a whole lot more information about that. They didn't really talk about it in the documentary, but I would really like to dive into that a little more and try to understand, how they did it and what, because I don't know of any other albums during this time period that was using any sort of digital technology.
At least not that we know of. Yeah. Not for a recording platform, but
right.
Anyways.
Yeah. So, and then we have the second song here, which is Graceland. Title track. Yes. To me, it just has a really nice kind of smooth flow to it. Incorporate like different types of percussion, and it has light guitar in the background, and just really complements the song, doesn't take away from the vocals. The bass is there. It has kind of this bubbly feeling, but to me, it's, at least from the lyrics, what I gathered, it seemed to be a song about loss. And I don't know if that's about his split from Carrie Fisher, but it just kind of seemed a song about loss and trying to get away. A journey, get away and escape somewhere else to find something. So
and he did.
He did. Third track, I Know What I Know. To me, the intro, dude, it sounds like Richie Valens' La Bamba. Like, that's the first thing I thought of when I heard of it. Like, that's just what it sounds like to me, man. Yeah.
And again, a lot of African influence in this one. The background vocals. And those would really good lyrics.
Yeah, the women's vocals in the background, I kind of equated that to, it sounds like birds singing. That's really, really what it sounds like to me. And you're definitely right. That's what really, to me, that's what is like the standout point to that song.
And it's funny because to me it flows really well into Gumboots. They're similar, I think, in feel.
Yeah.
And I guess really the whole rest of that side is similar in feel. So I mean, Gumboots, again, excellent song in its own right, and then it goes right into Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes. And to me, those three they go together so well. It was like they must have been done from the same session or something, because they're really similar in feel and lyrically great. But I mean that title, Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes, is
it's
pretty
cool.
awesome.
Well, and dude, the first minute of that song is like an intro with just basically the South African men kind of chant singing a little bit, and then like the song starts. I think it might be, it's close to, let's see, it looks like it's the longest song on the album, running close to 6 minutes.
I guess with
and one thing I really noticed once I started not listening to lyrics, but actually reading them, Paul Simon, he really tells stories in his songs. It's a lot of, whether it's about him or characters that he makes up or a conversation or some kind of interaction. And he does that a lot on this album. And I'm not as familiar with a lot of his other work, but he specifically does this on this album to many of the songs. Really really good at it. And so now, then we flip. We go to side 2, and we have probably I would say the hit that most people know, the most recognizable music video with Chevy Chase, and that would be "You Can Call Me Al."
Now that video, funny enough, was not the original video for it. I guess they had shot another video, and it just somebody saw it and were like, we can't even put this out, like it's just not good. And then I guess Lorne Michaels from SNL,
that's right,
had this idea to do it with Chevy Chase because I guess he loved the song and knew every word and all. He
knew all the words, right?
Yeah, and they could just make it funny, which it was.
Yeah, and that's the way I've always kind of thought of that song. Is just kind of silly and funny. I think it's because Chevy Chase was in it and he's singing along, and you have Paul Simon like moving in and out of the room, just kind of being bored, almost just kind of like, what am I doing here? Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. Definitely the hit off the album, like the one that everybody knows.
Good really, intro. I mean, a lot of recognizable parts.
That bass solo, oh, dude, how they didn't know how to fill in the second half of the bass solo, so they just took the first part and reversed it.
Oh, dude, yeah,
that's
which I believe they did at different parts. I think they did it on some other songs, maybe in some more subtle ways. But I believe there's a few other songs.
Is so distinct, and I mean, you couldn't. Once you hear it, like I can't unhear that. I mean, you just can't imagine the song played any differently.
Yep, absolutely. And I think actually, I have noted that I believe at the end of the next song after "You Can Call Me Al" is "Under African Skies." I would want you to actually, and maybe you know this off the top of your head, but I'd want you to listen just right towards the end again. It actually feels like they do something similar there.
Oh, with the reverse guitar.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and I don't know if it is that, but I know exactly what you mean, and it does sound that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't say for sure, but that without listening to it right now, which of course we certainly could not afford the rights to play that on here, but I'm pretty sure that you're right. That is reverse guitar.
Yeah. On that note, we are looking for sponsors. So, truly, anybody,
corporate, personal, what we don't.
We are ready to sell our souls. All right, because we just want to do this. But anyways, I digress. So, but again, in this song, it seems like he's telling the story of someone. He even uses there's a line in it. This is the story of how we began to remember. So,
great line.
Yeah, totally.
Line.
Again, I don't know if that's how he, a lot of his other work is like that, but I really feel he's just telling stories from different people and different perspectives.
A lot of, I will say, thinking about his solo work, this is not unique in that a lot of his songs are really interesting stories. But anyways.
Cool. Yeah. Then we move on to Homeless, which... The majority of that song, it's discussing poverty within, South Africa, and to me, it sounds like something out of The Lion King. So that has to have inspired the music for the movie, and the vocals, just a great mix of vocals. And I don't even think Paul Simon comes in until the end. Like at the very end, he has a couple words, but it's pretty much just them singing, and it's great.
Yeah, it is. And it's totally unique. I mean, I've never heard anything that would resemble, I don't want to say pop, but anything that would resemble a popular album that has anything akin to that.
No, not at all. Not at all. Then we have Crazy Love Volume 2. Now, is there a Crazy Love Volume 1?
I don't know off the top of my head. Maybe in something earlier. I certainly don't think it gained as much notoriety as Volume 2.
Right. Yeah.
Now, to me, that I would almost think would have to be about the breakup of his marriage. Yeah. I mean, I don't want any part of, or I don't want no part of this crazy love.
Crazy love. Yeah. yeah, it's got to be. I mean, I feel like that was that's the one thing that stood out to me and seemed to be very very self-explanatory. The thing is so the feel of the song to me though kind of almost contradicts the words a little bit, because I feel like the song is sort of upbeat. So I started kind of thinking of it from the perspective of, it feels upbeat, and maybe the lyrics are upbeat because he finally figured out that he didn't want to be in this crazy love anymore, and he feels good about it. Like, typically when you have a love song, it's like, oh, I'm down and out, life sucks, how am I ever going to get through this? But this almost seems to be like a joyous discovery that the love isn't going to continue, and
like he's okay.
He won't be in that pain anymore. So that's because it just when you're thinking about losing love, and then the song to me had a little bit of an upbeat feel to it. They seemed to kind of not mesh, but then I started thinking about it in a different way. So
yeah.
So I think you said something about polka, and that was your mother. To me, sounds very polka and almost least South African sounding on the album. It's that I guess the real to be a nerd, the real term would be Zydeco, but it's almost kind of like that Cajun style of accordion and everything as opposed to polka. But I definitely I'd see the relation. It's really strong. And I always liked this song because it's like it's like you're talking to one of your kids and telling them about what it was like in your relationship before they were a part of it, That's really what it is. Sure. Oh, that's funny. That's an interesting way to look at it. See,
well, and he says that was your mother and that was your father when I was still single and life was great.
Yeah. See, for me, as someone who isn't married and doesn't have kids, I can't relate to that. So I can respect your identifying with that for sure. And then we go to, I think, the final track, and the one we were talking about earlier that did have a little bit of controversy, and that's All Around the World, or the Myth of Fingerprints.
Yeah.
To me, it had the drum to it had a real like 80s sound. I know you were talking about 80s sound earlier, but almost like it was done with keyboard or something. To be honest, like it kind of sounded cheap. I can't say I loved it.
I can see that, and to me, it's interesting because almost everything else was done with South African musicians, and then you have this song, which is with Los Lobos, and knowing that it almost makes it in a way not quite fit the bill with the rest of it.
Yeah,
and so with that, I'm going to kind of segue into the scratch segment, and I'll explain why.
All right, let's do it.
See, now, my family, of course, had the CD of this because, that was just the hot technology at the time. So we had this album on CD, and when I ripped this album into my computer, what do you think happened?
That song didn't make it.
On All Around the World of the Myth of Fingerprints. It had it
had to scratch.
And so it was bad enough where I just couldn't make it through the song because it just ticked too much, and it was too bad to listen to. So for me, this always was the scratch track because it really was the scratch track. And so then, picking this album up on vinyl, it's interesting to listen to it because I after a while was pretty sure the album just ended with "That Was Your Mother."
That was your mother. Yeah. Well, let me take that one step further, my friend. You must have given me this album off your iTunes files.
Probably.
And so I have had it for years and years without that last track on it.
Yeah.
So I just assumed that it ended "That Was Your Mother." And then I really started doing research and started looking into this album, and I found the whole All the World, the controversy with that song being stolen.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the hell? Like, where is
what
it?
Song is this?
Yeah. Then I had to
it got stolen from my copy.
Yeah, exactly. So wait, is that literally your scratch? Is it?
It is literally my scratch in terms of the CD I had, and it's the one I would scratch because, like I was saying, it kind of does, for me, it doesn't really fit with the rest of it. And I hate to say it, I got so used to listening to it without that, I mean, of course, it would put on the vinyl of the record. I mean, it's a fine song, but
Sure.
to me, it just doesn't hold up with the other ones.
I gotcha. Well, I can't disagree with that because it makes sense on a lot of levels. So my scratch was actually the song just before that, and that was Your Mother, because I had listened. So here's the deal, though. So I had listened to the album so many times without the last track that we just discussed. And to me, when I take That Was Your Mother and I compare that to all the other tracks on the album, that to me is the least sounding kind of, South African song. And so that's why I scratched that one off. It just, it feels like it didn't fully fit. And so that's definitely the one that I've chosen to go with. And I don't want to say...
It's interesting because, I was just going to say both of those ones I would say have less of that feel than any of the others. Right.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting that he did decide to go that route a little bit and really just sort of mix things up. I mean, I can't, whatever, he chose to do what he did, and that was a creative choice. But I just do find it interesting that the majority of the songs on the rest of the album do have like a similar feel, and then these other two kind of are a little, just maybe a little off. The other one that I won't say if it didn't fit, but it's almost too upbeat and sort of happy, is You Can Call Me Al. That has a lot of energy to it.
Definitely consider that one, and not just because it's the hit. It just, I know what you mean. Like it's a little, it's a lot.
And maybe, and maybe I attribute it also to the music video that just seemed a little goofy to me. So it's kind of like this goofy, silly song, and it just kind of has that loose kind of feel to it. So I think, so not that I would scratch it, but I guess we
it was in the running.
Two.
It was in the running.
It was in the running. So we can scratch the last two off the album. Well, I think that about wraps us up here on this episode, my friend.
I would say so, Duder. Yeah.
All right. Okay, cool. Well, thank you again, everyone, for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this album. And if you have not listened to this album, we both highly recommend it. And we also highly recommend doing a little research beyond this podcast and just learning a little more about it, the time that it was created, and under the circumstances it was created. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, we are now on all social media platforms, as well as all your popular podcasting platforms. So look for us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, as well as Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. So we can be found. If you can't find us, then you're not looking hard enough. So until next time, we're ready to go, and we'll be moving on to the next one. Happy scratching, everyone.
Signing out. Scratch a Track is produced by the Dude Grimm. Additional music provided by More. That's ... MORE, and the Tims, TIMNZ. Copyright 2020, The Dude and Grimm Show.